Good day, everyone. I am Victor, the moderator for this webinar. I welcome everyone for today's webinar, which is HAZCOM 2025 updates, ensuring compliance and enhancing workplace safety. I wanted to introduce our presenter for today, Joe Keenan. Joe Keenan is a nationally recognized environmental, health, and safety professional with over 30 years of experience across industrial, construction, and manufacturing settings. I would now like to hand over the floor to the speaker. Over to you, Joe.
All right. Well, good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're logging in. Thank you so much for participating. Got a very timely and important topic to cover. And HAZCOM, or Hazard Communication Right to Know, also called the Global Harmonized System, or GHS, is a topic that virtually applies to all industries. With this presentation, we're going to be covering what GHS is from the ground up. And then toward the end of the presentation, we will get specifically into the 2025 updates. It says, what is OSHA's Global Harmonized System GHS standard? So according to OSHA, about 32 million workers work with or are potentially exposed to one or more chemical hazards. So according to OSHA, chemical exposure may cause or contribute to many serious health effects. Under this standard, you and your employees have a right to know what you're being exposed to in the workplace, and more importantly, how to protect yourselves. And that's what the requirements cover. So OSHA's HAZCOM standard falls under what's called 29 CFR 1910.1200. CFR stands for Code of Federal Regulations. OSHA has two standards, general industry and construction. So the HAZCOM standard is different from other OSHA health rules because it covers all hazardous chemicals. Again, according to OSHA, the rule also incorporates what we call a downstream flow of information. OSHA's HAZCOM standard applies to general industry, shipyard, marine terminals, longshoring, and construction employment. Now, let's talk about employer responsibilities. So there's employer responsibilities and employee responsibilities. You're also required to have a written, and notice that's highlighted in bold, Global Harmonized System program, including labels, SDSs, and employee training, and communicate hazard information to employees through labels, SDSs, and formal training programs. The written program has to include the following. The OSHA HAZCOM standard, hazard communication, again, right to know, was updated back in 2012 to comply with the United States what's called the Global Harmonized System of Classification and Labeling of Chemicals. So why is this important? The Global Harmonized System brings OSHA's HAZCOM standard into compliance with what the rest of the world is doing. So what has changed? Under the old HAZCOM standard, pre-2012, and they had a phase-in period. Obviously, we're well past that, but they allowed a phase-in period of several years. So hazard classifications, definitions of hazards have been changed to provide specific criteria for classification of health and physical hazards, as well as classification of mixtures. So chemical manufacturers and importers will be required to provide a label that includes a harmonized signal word, pictogram, and hazard statement for each hazard class and category. Safety data sheets now have a 16-section format. As you replace old material safety data sheets, our old safety data sheets, do not throw them away. Now let's go through the 16-section formatting. Section 8, exposure controls and personal protection. Section 12 through 15 is environmental and nature. So again, sections 12 through 15 are covered by different agencies, so they're technically not required under the OSHA GHS standard. So section 1 talks about identification. Section 2 is hazard identification. Section 3 talks about ingredients. Section 4 talks about first aid measures. So section 5 talks about firefighting measures. Section 6 talks about accidental release measures. Section 7 talks about handling and storage. Section 8 gets into exposure controls and personal protection. Section 9 gets into the physical and chemical properties. So section 10 talks about stability and reactivity. So section 11 can give you a lot of good information. Section 12, when it says non-mandatory. So how do I dispose of a chemical? Or section 13 talks about that. Transporting information, how do I transport it from A to B? Section 15 is regulatory information. And section 16 is other relevant information. Now let's talk about exposure terminology. Routes of entry. All right, now we come to pictograms. So here are the pictograms: health hazard, skin irritant, exploding bomb, skull and crossbones, and signal words. Now let's talk about the rest of the presentation is going to be on changes, and specifically 2025. So let's talk about what's new. Key anticipated changes in the upcoming update include the following. The baseline is current compliant requirements have not changed. So some best practices, what I recommend to make sure you're fully compliant with this standard.
And thank you very much, Joe, for this wonderful session. That concludes the session for today. Thank you everyone for participating. You may all disconnect now.